TForce Live. Hey guys, welcome to the Trinity Force podcast. My name is Adam Ponophobia Cogswell, and I am your host for this evening. As you can see, we have a great six-man crew. Before I jump into our awesome special guest for this week, I'm just going to quickly introduce everybody who's on the show, especially if you're a first-time watcher. Hey guys, welcome to the Trinity Force podcast. Screw up the live show. Dominic is with us.
How's it going?
DeClaude.
Howdy.
Daze.
Hey.
And Cheera Jaden.
Hi.
And Ghostcrawler from Riot Games is joining us this week to talk about, well, League of Legends.
Hello.
Welcome to the show.
Howdy, Ghostcrawler. Thanks for showing up.
It's awesome. Real excited we could do this.
Yeah, you know, we heard a long time ago that you're a listener to the podcast. You know, you'll catch the show from here from time to time. So we're really happy to actually be able to talk to you and have a conversation. I actually like that I can talk to you like a person and it's not like talking to a corporate drone. So applause for that.
Let me check with PR and see if it's okay for me to acknowledge that.
So you could respond.
I expect you to have like a PR guy the entire time going.
Yeah, he's right off screen.
Giving you the nod or the head shake.
Yeah. It's like the lawyer whispering in your ear. It's like,
I would have paid for that, honestly.
As a guy who works with a lot of lawyers, I actually genuinely appreciate that.
All right.
Is this so tier?
Yeah. Well, let's just jump right into the conversation. Why don't we? We have an hour to talk about as much as we can about League of Legends and really rack Ghostcrawler's brain. So actually, first of all, Ghostcrawler, can you kind of give us a background of who you are for anybody who might not know Ghostcrawler?
Sure. I am one of the lead designers on League of Legends. I've only been here like 8 months or so. Before that, I worked on a game called World of Warcraft for about 6 years. And before that, I worked on a game called Age of Empires for about 10 years. So I'm an industry vet at this point, and super excited to join Riot. It's a great place, very, very high energy, and the League of Legends community has just been incredible to work with. So it was a great move for me, and I'm really happy to be here.
Oh yeah, definitely a good move for you. What is League of Legends right now? The most played game in the world?
It's played a lot. Not sure how you measure the iOS games and things like that, but
so you kind of you're in the limelight now. You you were with World of Warcraft and Age of Empires as well.
Been part of two of them,
especially if it has anything to do with the Teutonic Knights. God, those guys.
Yes, Teutonic Knights. Yeah.
Teutonic Knights, very good.
The Reds
Bruce are all over again, like the slow guy who hits hard, but no one ever stands around to get hit, so they're sad.
Yep.
Well, speaking of being in the limelight, one of the main questions that I really wanted to ask you is, after you've gone through everything with World of Warcraft, like we know you have you have a pretty crazy history with that going on the forums, and people blame you for frost mages. We're not going to talk about that, but what I do want to know is, through all of that you had to go through with World of Warcraft, and now going into Riot Games, have you had to do like any kind of formal training, or have you had any like PR training with that, or did you get sat down in a room and really hounded in how you had to go about doing all that, talking on the forums and everything?
Are you training everybody else at this point since you've been doing it so long?
You've proven a mental fortitude like that is kind of unique for that sort of situation with just how much activity you've had in the public eye anyway with games.
Oh, thanks. I appreciate it. A little bit. I mean, I think all the companies I worked with had a few hours of like, this is the persona we want to project. These are areas to stay away from. Don't get caught in, a lot of name calling and things like that. Remember, your statements will often get taken out of context, and players reading it after the fact won't necessarily see the whole conversation. They'll just see what you said. But honestly, a lot of it is just learning to swim by drowning. That you make a lot of mistakes for the first few years. You get better. You learn what can be interpreted the wrong way, or what was, you lost your temper in some situation, and it happens less often now. And Riot, one of the things I love about Riot is the company really wants Rioters to engage with players, and it's almost a requirement here, whereas at some companies you're kind of begging, like, can I please get out there and talk to players? But Riot's like, no, go do it. That's part of your job, to get feedback, to make sure people really believe that their point of view is being heard, and I love that.
Yeah, that's pretty cool. You don't have to really wade through so much red tape just to get out and speak to the community.
Yeah.
Well, good. Actually, I'm going to go ahead and let Dom take these next couple questions, because you were really the one to push out with the, we want to talk a little bit about fighters, kind of talk about top lane and where we're going with that, especially after the release of Azir.
I mean, that's basically the crux of it. You guys have been having so many conversations, I'm sure internally, but even on the forums and within the community about fighters. The role itself has evolved heavily from season 1 when they were basically just a bundle of stats with a gap closer. But it still seems like they never get to quite like the spot where you feel like you're meaningful damage who is a bit durable but not like fully durable. Like basically, no matter what you guys seem to do, you end up where they are either played as tanks or played as assassins, and there just never seems to be a good middle ground. And I know you've had a lot of conversations about this on the forums, but do you specifically have a vision for this, or can you divulge anything that you guys are looking to do with that specific role? Because it does end up being it's a lot of the champions out there that could fit into that.
Oh yeah. So it's a really big topic. Just to provide some perspective, I feel like originally when the first champions for League were designed, that role was very descriptive. It's like, oh, this dude has a sword, clearly he's a fighter. This dude fires a gun, clearly she's a marksman. And that served us well for years. And now that we have so many champions, we have had to take a step back and say, okay, these roles mean something besides just the adjective to describe what weapon they're holding. And so we've tried to take a step back and think about what is it that someone with limited mobility brings to the table? What is it that someone with extreme mobility brings to the table? I think a really good example of this are tanks, where the kind of historical RPG, even World of Warcraft definition of a tank was someone who could take a lot of damage, who stands in front of their allies, soaks it up to kind of protect the weaker backline. And over time, we feel like in League, what the tank really is the initiator. And I think I've even heard you guys mention that online before, is the person that can kind of decide, we're going to fight now because I'm going to suck you in, or I'm going to hit you with an AE or something like that.
Right, you don't want Sona to be your initiator.
Yeah, it happens sometimes. But
sure,
she can.
Only when I play her.
The definition of a tank is initiation. Does that mean some big brawny dude with a shield, maybe they're not a tank anymore, maybe they're some other role? And so similarly, we've been talking a lot about, what does a fighter mean? Does it just mean someone who doesn't take as much damage as a tank, or someone who doesn't initiate as well as a tank? We feel like there are probably 3 or 4 different roles that we're all calling fighter right now. Like, there's kind of the classic Darius bruiser, but there's also someone who can leap in and fight, maybe not quite with the burst of an assassin, but definitely has high mobility to jump in there. And so we're trying to break down these sub-roles and then decide, do we really go to players and say, look, we're just kidding, there's really like 7 or 8 roles in the game? Or do we say there's just like sub-classifications of fighters, and we make sure that the slow bruiser guys are a little different than the diver guys and that sort of thing?
Isn't it a case, though, where if most fighters tend to have these qualities, you can really just sort of use that space to define characters therein and everything, but at least you understand what bruisers are going forward, even if, like...
Yeah, exactly. And there are some, I think, that are really clear-cut cases, and then there are some that either break the rules, and that's okay as long as you understand this is a bruiser that's breaking the rules because he has really good initiation or really good range or something. Or, in a lot of cases, we have someone that's ambiguous. Like, well, what is Trinity really trying to be? Is he trying to be a melee carry? Mm-hmm. Is he trying to just be an assassin? And figure out what role we think they belong in. And that's really challenging with existing champions, because players have expectations, or this is their main, and they're really nervous when you start messing with the role of their main. And also, it gets into this issue that if we just start changing some of the fighters without changing all of them at once, then you have the old guys who can kind of do everything. So when you change some of them, but you don't change all of them, the ones you've changed just kind of fall off because they can't compete with the super generalist, if that makes sense. And that's really why this whole fighter overhaul has turned into such a big, slow project that players rightfully keep saying, fighter rework where, because it doesn't happen.
I really like the idea of the sub-classification of fighters, because we've grown up for so many years with tank, mage, fighter, healer, pretty much.
Yeah.
Right. There's like 4 or 5 classifications, and you could even go spellcaster for one of those. So At what point does Fiora change from Darius? Sure, she's a fighter by definition in her lore, but does she play the same way in the game? And so looking at it in the way you guys have been is kind of eye-opening. And that kind of leads me into a next question about fighters and moving into masteries, really. I'm sure you have, your hand in the mastery changes, or, you talk about them quite a bit. Now, how do those play a role when we're looking at fighters for the future? Because I'm sure in Season 5, we're going to see new masteries or tweaks to them. And, for example, Mundo, who is not a fighter, he's a tank, but he became this huge... he became this huge problem because of masteries, but no one saw it coming until it happened. So are we going to see something different out of Riot this next in Season 5, how masteries are going to be taken into account?
You're talking about masteries like runes and masteries, not like mastery like skill and
yeah, sorry.
Yeah.
Right.
I mean, we're right in the middle of figuring out preseason right now, and I've hinted a few times that we're looking at some pretty radical changes to the game. And we're going to be really excited to let players get their hands on it and say, like, dude, this is insane, or wow, this is really exciting. So hopefully we'll be able to start talking about that kind of stuff soon. We're still focused on kind of some high-level changes at the moment. We'll get down into more of the, the nitty-gritty of, like, do we need to change runes and masteries to support some of these changes or not?
Okay. Not the in-depth answer, but as soon as you started saying, there's more to come there, I'm like, all right, well, I get it. Yeah.
Drastic changes, that gets me a little excited.
Yep.
That's the idea, is not to freak players out, but to get them like, ooh, this is cool, I want to pay attention.
Oh, cool.
We as a group tend to get really excited about changes and stuff, even like, and then something happens, we're like, okay, I'm over it, next change. But
I also like that, because every time they end up switching something like that up at the end of a season, it's almost a completely fresh new experience when you jump into it, getting ready for the next, season, year, whatever you want to call it. So I'm happy if there's cool stuff on the horizon. Yeah.
Yeah, I really think that's huge. Players really like to try to solve the puzzle, and when they feel like it's solved, they lose a little bit of interest. I mean, it's still fun to see if you can execute, but you don't have the fun games like, ooh, how do I counter that next time I see it? And really, I don't want to give the impression that we just like randomly mess with shit so that players are constantly being disrupted. But we want to overall make sure that there's some interesting things you can engage with and try to think a little bit about what's the right solution to this counter pick, or what's the right solution to this dude appearing in a lane I wasn't expecting.
And then it's just a matter of keeping up with the meta.
Yeah.
Whether you keep up with the meta, or it looks like the last few changes have been to adapt to the meta, but do you foresee maybe releasing a champion or something that might alter the meta or push towards a new meta?
It's weird.
Or is that something the players decide?
Well, and that's what I was going to say is we've kind of come to the conclusion that we have probably been a little too reactive to players trying crazy new things. Like, oh, we don't want you to play like that. We don't want you to use that champion in that lane. That's wrong. So we're gonna nerf it next patch.
Right.
So we're gonna try to be a little more. I don't want to say we're gonna ignore balance problems, because if something's broken, we're gonna get in and fix it. But we want to give players more of a chance to react to a crazy strategy, because sometimes that's all it is you're not expecting the enemy team to do this, and once they do it and you've played a few games, someone smart figures out a counter strategy to that, and then the game can kind of evolve in fun ways without Riot constantly stepping in and saying, no, you're playing the game wrong, we're gonna slap you on the wrist for it. Right. Because over time, players stop experimenting because they know if they do anything crazy, we're going to overreact anyway.
When you're designing new champions, do you guys take into account the current meta, and do you ever try to make a champion that's specifically going to change the meta in any way?
I would say what we've done, the traditional way to design champions is to say, we're making Gnar. He's going to be a fighter. He's designed for the top lane. And we're trying to back off of that a little bit and say, this champion has these mechanics and maybe even this kind of strategic niche in the game. Players, go see what you can do with this. We're not just going to throw random shit together. Right. But if players figure out, hey, this champion really works better mid or better support than we originally intended, maybe that's cool. As long as it doesn't stifle diversity for all the other champions trying to fill that role.
I prefer that too, than just say, hey, look, it has to be in this spot. You
In
know?
a
I'm
way,
laughing 'cause
that
I
reminds
immediately
me-
think of Soraka and Lulu for that. It's like,
Well,
hey, look what
yeah,
they
you
were
think of
doing
Soraka,
to
so-
mid lane.
And Diana too. Like it's supposed to be a character who is supposed to be a a jungling AP that turned into just dominant mid lane assassin for a while.
Tank assassin.
Yeah, tank
Fighter
assassin,
bruiser, really.
unkillable assassin.
Yeah, it's a problem when you can only play the champion in the, let's call it the novel way, or when they squeeze everyone else out. Like, it's fine that Lulu can kind of be mid or support. If she's so good at mid that no other mage can compete there and playing her support is dumb, that's kind of when we feel like we have to step in.
Right.
So, on the podcast, and I'm sure you've heard us talk about it before, are you familiar with the 3-hit rule that we have
Actually,
come up?
like waiting to bring this up, so I'm glad you're doing it.
Yes, I am familiar with it.
Okay. For those of you out there who don't know, the podcast we have considered for fighters a 3-hit rule. A fighter can go in, get 3 hits, and then they have to play defensively or react in some way to what is going on. What are you, with that in mind, what are we looking forward to in fighters? Are we trying to get fighters that are doing more than 3 hits? Are we going to have more CC? You know, when you're looking at those classifications, how do we go about fixing the 3-hit rule?
Because like in a lot of cases, a fighter realistically could be dead by the time he or she gets that 3rd hit off.
Right.
Just
Yeah.
by nature of having to be that close to everything else.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I feel like that really is part of the fighter problem, is particularly if they're fighting a ranged champion and they finally close the gap to where they can start auto-attacking and they can't survive very long to do that. That means the only way to make them effective is to stick more and more either CC or burst on them to where they kind of feel like assassins now, or tanks
Right.
if their CC is really good. The way we hope to open that up a little bit is by differentiating the fighters. So not everyone will be good at, here's your gap closing ability, here's your self-heal or something like that. Some might be better at chaining attacks to subsequent targets. Some might be better at AE. Some might be better at self-healing, but over time, not just I can absorb a lot of hits through armor or lifesteal or something like that. Fighters really, this is where the whole Renekton bar came from, is fighters really suffer from the whack-a-mole, that if we nerf one, the next one comes up, because their roles are so similar that it's a math problem. Players can kind of say, well, this champion has the best combination of survivability and damage, so I'm going to play this champion. And if you nerf it, then I'm going to just play the next champion in that role. Instead, we would kind of like it to be, well, they're trade-offs. This champion is really good at sustain, but really, really suffers when she's crowd controlled, that sort of thing. And we think by pushing the champions a little farther apart that way, it'll open up a lot more options to how you build a team, how you approach a fight, that sort of thing.
So we've been, going with that and what we've been seeing, the meta shift over from Season 2 to Season 4, we'll say, and how there always has to be an initiator on the team, whether it's jungle or top lane or mid lane or whatever it is. There has to be an initiator on the team. And as we're changing fighters and really looking at fixing the roles of them, are we going to see more of that shift where top laners are going to have to be the initiators and the junglers are going to be the fighters? Like I think at one point in time, with Mundo, Shyvana, Malphite, whatever it was, because you have to put that initiator somewhere. So do fighters now get initiation? Do they get a gap closer? What is the difference between Udyr and somebody like Fiora who's a dash?
Right. Ideally, we think initiation is a good role for the tank. So that's kind of how we'd like to see that broken up between a fighter who really needs an initiator to go along with them, or the tank who can initiate but probably doesn't have the burst damage, maybe even the sustain as another role. In terms of whether or not that has to be top lane or not, I think that's the kind of thing we'd like to see players experiment with a little more. Currently, part of the whole fighter discussion is players get a little freaked out right now when there's not a slow melee dude in the top lane. Mm-hmm. And we're going to have to make it feel like even if there's not a slow melee dude in the top lane every game, there is a role for you if you love Shyvana, if you love Darius. There's somewhere you can play where they'll be effective. It's not just going to be marksmen in all five slots.
I'm sure you saw the what is it, LOL builder? Whoever was, they did that study that showed like your teams just perform worse depending on the certain number of a certain role they have on there, and like 3 marksmen was really, really not great.
Yeah. And I don't know that we ever want to see teams of 3 marksmen, but at least we could open it up a little more to, if you're going to really give up on having initiation at all, that's a big hit, but maybe it's offset by strengths in other areas. I think currently you'd just be weaker doing that because you're kind of missing a really critical role in your team makeup.
Sure. Well, how does somebody, going forward, I feel like everybody has to have a dash or a gap closer or some kind of jump to get into a fight. Do you guys have some way that you're thinking about, mixing that up so that I can play somebody like Udyr who has just a mini dash to get in the fight, but I can still be effective out of more than one lane?
Yeah, we really hate to think that you just have to have a dash or some kind of gap closer to be effective. It's a fair criticism that we've been going in that direction, but that's not to say it has to be like that. There are other solutions to movement. Try not to give anything away here. Thinking about
Dodge is coming back.
Oh,
yeah.
God.
Oh, no.
Dodging turret shots. I love it.
And then we see Jax at the top again just because of that.
So you look at some marksmen when you decide like which marksmen have an escape or a gap closer, and some of them that don't are coming back into favor, like Kog'Maw, for example, because of his hyper carry abilities. Jinx is still pretty good.
Yeah, giving an escape to a marksman just because you're trying to fill out the roster of cool abilities, I think is super dangerous, because that's where we get I do tons and tons of damage. Then when you finally close, I jump away.
Right.
That's fun for the marksman. And again,
fun
that's okay if they sacrifice somewhere else. Like maybe we shift Caitlyn over to being I jump away from you all the time, but as a result, maybe her damage is lower. Or maybe as a result, when you do catch up with her, she's super fragile, so maybe she does need a babysitter. Or alternatively, maybe we were talking about maybe what Caitlyn should be really good at is I don't need a lot of babysitting because I do have long range and I do have a backwards leap, so my support or who else is in the bottom lane with me can roam a little bit more. And compared to Kog'Maw, maybe you need to babysit him. Things like that.
Or you dangle a carrot on the ability like with Graves and say, okay, it'll increase your attack speed, so you probably don't want to use it to run away.
Yeah, I was actually just thinking about that. It's like, oh, hey, yeah, he can dash away, and then he slows them down, and then by the time they close the gap, he has 2 shotgun blasts going into their face. No wonder he's been nerfed so and
so
it's
heavily.
just kind of...
Yeah. It really gets into champions need to have strengths but also weaknesses when they're just kind of good at everything. And to be fair, that's often what players want is I want to be a generalist. I don't want anyone to be able to counter me really easily. Sure. It makes the champions all feel a little too similar. It really feels like your strategic options are more limited because you can't be smart and try to kind of exploit what the enemy is weak at.
Right, and you don't want your champion to be banned out every game.
Yes, absolutely.
Right.
Literally.
Yeah.
I'm genuinely curious. Understanding the game has 121 champions, some of whom were released in 2009. Like, which champion, as a designer, do you think is kind of has just the most frustrating design currently in existence? This is just kind of toss out there. And if you can't talk about it, you can't talk about it. No big deal. But like, I'm curious about how you look at the roster as opposed to a normal player.
I mean there's 2 ways to answer that. There's champions that have so many design problems that we don't know what to. I don't want to say we don't know what to do with them. Let's say the update is big, like Poppy, maybe Shaco are kind of in this category of like, holy crap, they need a lot of work. It's not like tweak a little bit here and now they're good to go. Mm-hmm. On the opposite end of the spectrum, I think Nidalee is a good example where we just could and have still struggled a little bit to get the right balance of I can throw a spear from a long way off, cause a ton of damage, and then run away as soon as you get close to me. Range and movement are always a tough balance, and we're still not at a sweet spot on her, obviously.
Yeah, I just saw in patch 4.17, which, by the way, we are blaming you for that coming out today.
Yeah, we usually talk about the patches when they're released.
Oh, right.
Yes. So just so you know, we're going to blame you the entire podcast for not having a patch 4.1 discussion this Friday for our listeners to listen to. It's all your fault, okay? So you have to take some flack somewhere from us.
No problem.
But I'm sure you had your hand. We're kind of talking about movement on marksmen and how they're are going to act going forward. But we saw that giant 80 itemization change a few patches ago.
Like 14 or something like that. I can't remember. 11? I don't remember. A while ago.
I was 11 or 12, something like that. We're on 17. Holy crap! You're making me think about it.
I'm sure he feels like that. Holy crap!
Yeah, well, not to mention everything he has to think about for the future. But caster type marksmen were really hit particularly hard in this itemization rework. Varus, Sivir, Graves, for example, all of them require heavy attack damage to do any kind of damage. So was that something you guys foresaw when you made the change, or is that kind of like, the community just reminded us of it?
Yeah, I think, we had very noble intent with those changes to open up some more choices for later game marksman builds, but it definitely, I think, overall inflated the hyper carries a little too much and made, some of the other guys have vanished a little. So I think overall we missed the mark a little bit on that, and it's something we're trying to figure out the best way to adjust going forward. I'm trying not to throw any dudes under the bus here because I'm not a balanced guy. We have a balanced team with designers and a lot of other different disciplines on there, and they make all of those decisions. So I don't want to sit here and throw them under the bus.
I feel like Essence Reaver was an attempt to solve that problem, but it didn't work out that way and everything. To me personally, it's because even though it looks like it has stats that AD casters are going to want. They don't get nearly as much out of lifesteal as the just more auto attack focus marksmen do. What else about that item do you really think missed the? God damn it! Didn't work out properly. Or was it just like a community misperception going into the item and just like they weren't going to go for it no matter what happened?
I don't know if it's a community misperception. This is the cop-out answer, but balance is really hard.
We know.
That's the best answer we could
have heard. The reason it's really hard is because even if we played 1,000 games internally, which is very hard to do, shit goes live, and millions of players are playing it. And yes, some things we should have caught before they go out, and that's the kind of stuff where systemically we just have to fix our process to be better at catching the obvious stuff. And then there's sometimes we just don't predict what players are going to do, and I don't think this is really a case of that, but there's times when like, wow, we didn't see that coming, what are we going to do about it?
So I need a solid answer on this. Frozen Mallet's going to be removed from the game, right?
Not next patch.
Good answer. Good answer.
Yeah, and accurate.
I would say, overall, we think items, particularly going to preseason, is a great opportunity to kind of explore some new cool things. A lot of the items we have right now are just like, hey, you get more stats. Hey, do you want more stats? And we're trying to do some more things to like, I'm really having this particular problem with the enemy team. I'm going to choose this item to try to get that. You get a little bit of that when people build tanky versus build damage, but we think there's a lot more opportunities there.
Is that more likely to result in heavy item reworks or introduction of new items?
Probably a little of both. At the moment, we're erring more on the side of new items. There are probably some that still are just problematic that may go away or get heavily changed. There's some no-brainers in there that are too effective.
So does that mean as we go forward with like item changes, item reworks, a lot of like on the podcast, we like to talk about what items are effective and what are not. People like to write in, why can't you build Wit's End all the time? And we say there's items like Recurve Bow, where you're spending that, 800, 900 gold on this item that gives you 40% attack speed, but you could spend an equivalent amount on something like Bilgewater Cutlass. Now that you have an active, you have lifesteal, you're doing magic damage with it, yada, yada. Yeah. So step items. Are we going to be seeing more step items in the future, or could we potentially see more of that where we have a Bilgewater into a Blade of the Ruined King, or a piece into Wit's End?
Yeah. if there are going to be more endgame options for players, then it has to be like some forking along the way of these item builds. Otherwise, you're screwed and you have to start over at the very beginning again. You've already kind of lost. You can't really change your strategy.
So
probably
Executioner's Calling as a step item now into some really cool new item.
I forgot that was an item.
Even though we touted it for how many episodes?
I know,
Good
yeah.
point.
No, I completely forgot about it. Bought Morella Namicon the other day. Completely forgot Executioner Calling is there.
Days, we can't hear you.
Days.
Give her a minute as she plugs her mic back in.
Cord.
The cat stepping on the cord.
It's the cat that screwed everything up.
So if you guys
Come on now.
Yes, you're
There we
back.
go.
Okay, I'm
Look
back.
at unclear.
The
Leave it,
cat's a
Charlie.
problem.
The
She'll be
cat's
locked
looking
up next
so
episode.
smug.
She's like,
Smug.
if you're not giving me attention, you're not giving them it either.
Really OP.
Right. So in terms of items, I know that a lot of times when champions are reworked or released, there's some unexpected things that happen with them that the community finds. But is it harder with items since it affects so many champions? Do you find a lot more side effects that you didn't know through PBE testing and things like that?
Yeah, totally. Like you said, the matrix there is just enormous. And we've seen that when we're going to make this item for tanks. And then marksmen are like, "Ooh, that looks really good. I think I'm going to take that." The league attribute mechanics are not, say, strength, agility, intellect, right? So if you like to get your damage from auto attacks, there's a lot of items that benefit your auto attacks. And it's sometimes hard for us to say, no, we don't want you to take this item. This item is for someone else. We could solve that by going to a more rigid system where, like, no, marksman just can't equip this item. That's super heavy-handed, and we'd like to avoid that. We think that's part of the cool experimentation that's out there is the thought of, I'm going to take this crazy item. No one's thought of a mage equipping this before. But it definitely makes it hard when someone, we really made this change for someone else, and then a different role is starting to look, oh, that looks pretty good. I think I'm going to try that.
I think a great example of that would be Targon's at the beginning of this season.
Right. That was so abused.
Yeah,
when
with
season came out. Yeah.
80 carries taking it and just free farming the lane forever.
Oh, yeah.
Yes.
Does
Double
this mean we
Targons.
might see multiple build paths for one item? Is that
Oh, you
something?
mean multiple builds to get
to one
get
final
The
item?
singular thing.
That's
We
interesting.
have talked about that. I'm trying to. I just don't remember if we rejected it for design reasons or technical reasons, but
But they did reject it.
I'm not sure.
I'm sure
I'd
there's
have-
lots of stuff that's floating that could always come back.
It's got
and
to. I mean,
grab
but that's
later.
got to be really hard to do. I mean, even when we briefly talked
Right.
about it, however many episodes ago, we were like, yeah, that even just logistically trying to think of it, it doesn't. And granting, you guys have a bunch of people who get paid to do that and everything, but still, like to a point, that's got to just confuse the player, right? Is there any way you could do it in a way that's not confusing to the people playing the game?
Off the top of my head, the easiest way to do it would just be to have two items that perform almost identically with different names, and that way there's different builds, but you can get it in a couple different ways.
But even then, like if it's basically the same item, how's the player supposed to know, which item is the one to go for if on paper they look the exact same,
Yeah. I mean, I agree. It's a challenge, and it's also one of those areas where we hesitate to tell players too much. No, this is the design intent. We want you to do this, because that sense of exploration is fun, and the sense of trying to try out different crazy things to see what works is fun.
Right.
We do the recommended items and things like that, but I think taken to too much of an extreme, it feels like, again, Riot's trying to tell you how to play the game instead of saying, here's some cool stuff, go out there and have fun.
Well, I'm sure it's, correct me if I'm wrong, but at some point Riot has to put their foot down and say, this is how we want you to play the game. Now, there can be branches off of playing it correctly, but a very good example of this is the 4v1 strategy we saw earlier in the season, and Riot took steps to, put armor on the turrets and not to it was more to deter pro players from always running that strategy rather than saying you can't run it. But there has to be a point, right, that Riot says
it was to deter it.
Or you shouldn't be doing it, and you should find another way to play the game. I mean, I'm not sure if I'm saying it properly, but I think you get the gist of my...
that almost brings up a different question there. You know, like, how frustrating is it for pros to do something, and then you have to respond because you know, even if it only works at the highest level of play, you know it's going to trickle down into solo queue. Is that, like...
It is amazing the amount of influence the pros have just from trying, they'll try something and all of a sudden that is now the only choice and you get mocked in solo queue if you don't ban whoever or pick whoever. I knew it was a phenomenon coming into this job, but I kind of underestimated how big it is, People who don't even watch LCS manage to find out the right way to do something just based on what the pros do.
What percentage of the player base watches LCS? If you, like, an estimate?
It's high. I'm trying to remember the exact number. It's surprisingly high, I think, for a game like this. And I don't know what it is off the top of my head. Okay. I hate to get it wrong. I was surprised.
That's fine. Surprisingly high is good enough for me. I would have guessed modest, but yeah, surprisingly high. That's interesting.
Here's an interesting thing, and I've hinted at this before, that Europe and North America exchange a lot of information, and then China and Korea do very different things, and even though it's not that hard to see what happened in OGN or whatever, it doesn't always go back and forth. And
so it doesn't affect the region,
Yeah. So it makes finals really exciting because then you have these different strategies colliding. But it often surprises me that, say, NA players don't pick up, oh, did you see what the Chinese players were doing last week? We should try that. They're still very isolated despite this, digital world where we're all talking to each other all the time.
We've talked about that quite a bit a while ago. Europe was playing double AP comps, like with Lissandra top, and there was a little bit of Rumble, in there as well. And America was still running hyper carries or was still running tanks tops, and we never saw that change between either of the regions.
Yeah, stereotyping millions of players is super, super dangerous, but you often see a lot of crazy experimentation coming out of Europe. Whereas I think the NA players tend to be a little more conservative. They want to go with tried and true strategies and not, hey, let's try this. Chinese players tend to really like flashy melee. That's something about their culture or play style makes them gravitate more towards melee than ranged.
That's interesting.
It's all the really pro,
If you think of, I think it was
really
DreamHack where we saw Star Royal Club. It was either Royal Club or OMG. I can't remember who came in. They were playing Yasuo, and they dominated M5 with Yasuo mid. They started to really push it hard. It was before we really saw the Yasuo. So that's the same thing that Greg was just talking about. Dom, do you remember? Does that kind of making a tick?
No, because you said M5, and that would have...
Oh, sorry.
How far back are we going here? Okay.
Gambit Gaming. but
and even then...
But,
okay, I know what event you're talking about. Yeah, I know. Okay. I don't remember the team, but I know what event you're talking about now.
Right. Well, moving on, I do
personally,
have a question.
I was going to say, I personally like experimenting. I like the freedom to experiment with an item build or do something different, despite other people in the game saying, hey, that's not what I see all the pros doing, so don't do that. I like to experiment and find ways to make things useful, So I like that you're going in that direction. So please keep that up. Thank you.
There's a big social challenge there. Like, it's much easier to experiment with your friends when you're like, hey, I'm going to try this. Sorry if it doesn't work out. But if you try that in solo queue, dudes are like, you just cost me a game. Thanks. It's much harder.
Or you kick ass.
That's why everybody.
That's also not as nice as anybody else is going to say it if you screw up either.
So go ahead.
Back to the recommended items. How do you try to balance giving that guidance to newer players while not hindering the creativity? Like you said, you specifically don't want to tell people this is what you should build, this is how you should play them. How do you balance that learning curve?
Oh, it's so hard. I can't remember the champion. You can probably look at the patch notes and see it. We changed the recommended items for a champion, say 4 or 5 patches ago, and his win rate went up like 5%. Just from changing the recommended items.
Oh, wow.
That's crazy.
A little sad that it has that much of an influence, but I think a lot of players still really do that.
No, absolutely. Coming from, knowing our audience, a lot of our audience will write us and ask us, how do I build my AD carry? I see all these people building Blade of the Ruin King, but why are they building Blade of the Ruin King when my items say to build a Bloodthirster first?
And should it be every AD carry that gets BORK or only some of them? And how do I know the difference? Right. And yeah.
Well, and the worst part is those recommended items get outdated just based on meta shifts and everything. I mean, marksmen tend to be pretty homogenized, but a mid laner.
Yeah. So, and that's what I was going to say is its intent is for new players or players trying new roles. Like, I'm a jungle main. I don't know marksman that well. I don't even know what to start with, and that's where the recommended items go in. We certainly don't want to try to say this is the only way to do it. This is just kind of a fairly safe bet if you're not sure what to do.
Right.
Maybe pro player recommended items could come up as a thing. Like let me check out Doublelift's recommended items. Already innately in there, recommended Doublelift's recommended Vayne kit. Maybe something like that.
Yeah, we've actually talked about that of showing some kind of most popular choices instead of Riot recommended, but we worry about that. That self-fulfilling cycle of everyone's doing this, I better do it too.
How
or
adaptable is it?
And then pretty soon it stifles creativity.
So I want to talk about summoners, but I want to step back since we're talking about new players, so that that's on the deck here. Speaking of new players, do you have your hand in dealing with some of those changes, like the tutorials and the leveling up process, and how the summoner actually works in the game?
Yeah, absolutely. We recently did a couple of changes there. We changed the recommended champions, which seemed to have a pretty good effect for new players. And we also launched intro bots, which are not necessarily easier bots, but bots that are a little more forgiving for someone who hasn't learned the game.
Dumber bots.
Yeah. They're not really just playing badly. They're just not doing things that are super annoying. Like they don't back the second they get injured. They give you a little bit of an opportunity to take them out or something like that. It's a challenge because Riot believes really strongly that we don't want to compromise the integrity of the game for existing players just to attract new players. We have a lot of players, and it's a far worse thing if we drive some of them away by quote unquote dumbing the game down or something than we stand to gain by having a few more players pick it up. I mean, the reality is a lot of players learn League because a friend teaches them how to play League. And they do a much better job than any tutorial will.
We've actually had a lot of listeners write in to the effect do we think you guys are making the game kind of too difficult, just because there are so many champions out there who do things under certain conditions, or you press a button and conditions change and that's the only time you can do ability. I mean, Lee Sin's a good example. I mean, you're basically talking about skill cap or champion complexity and everything, but it seems like more and more champions come out and they become overwhelming to the average player. Is that how do you fight that concern when you're going through design?
So the perfect champion that way has a very, very high skill ceiling, maybe infinitely high. That's ideal for us because then no one can ever perfectly master the champion. They can come out of every game saying, oh, this one situation, at 5 minutes, 32 seconds in, I made the wrong call there. Next game, I won't make that mistake. So we want a really high skill ceiling, but we also ideally want a really low skill floor where you can get in there, you can do okay just kind of using your ult on cooldown. There's better ways to use it. It really sucks to waste an ult. If you cast it back in your base, you're wasting it. But as long as you're casting in a team fight, ideally you should get something out of it. It's not true of every champion, but as a general guideline, we would like it to do something. But then there should also be opportunities for, I used it perfectly. I timed it, I positioned it exactly right. That was the right time in the game to do it, and it really kind of turned the course of battle. So we look a lot at comparing the skill ceiling to the skill floor. If we have to compromise, we would rather make the skill ceiling higher because we want to make sure the game can never be completely mastered, but we try to make sure that the skill floor is there as well. And Lee is a great example of someone with a very high skill floor. That's not a great champion to jump in if you've never played jungler or something in that role before. There's a lot going on, and I think Yasuo is like that as well.
Does that create its own problems where you now have to decide whether to balance around the skill ceiling or the skill floor, and then you have people maybe at lower levels that can't take advantage of the situation, but at higher levels the champion's just in a broken state where they're easily taken advantage of?
Yeah. I mean, I think in that case we would make sure at the competitive level that the champion is fair. We try to make sure, I mean, the game has a lot of champions. We just add more all the time. So I don't necessarily think a player is going to be able to play every champion and be just as effective. I mean, it's kind of unrealistic. So if Lee Sin is something that you just can't ever master, that's okay. There's still 119 other champions you can play.
Right.
We are trying to avoid, I feel like traditionally Riot did have this concept of beginner champions that we have to be careful not to touch because then the noobs, maybe Garen, maybe Ashe, Rise. And we're trying to back off of that a little bit. Like, it sucks if you're just a Garen main and you feel like Garen's never going to be competitive because Riot is keeping him in the kiddie pool. That's something we're trying to improve over time.
Is that important to you, a champion being competitive? And I like that term because viable to me, like pretty much every champion could be viable, and the people arguing otherwise are using a very strict definition of the term. But it's going to be rare to see Garen in competitive play. Do you take that into consideration when doing, I guess, balancing or anything else?
Yeah, I mean, there's at the high level, there's two ways to approach that problem. The one is you can say we can offer a really, really well balanced game with 15 champions, and often, to be fair, that's what LCS devolves to.
Mm-hmm. But anything would.
Yeah,
right.
The bargain we're kind of setting up with players is there's all these champions out there. You may have purchased one with money, and we feel like we kind of owe players that you can play that champion. And so I don't think it's necessarily fair to say some champions are never going to be competitive. I think it's reasonable to say some of them can't be competitive now just because we have a backlog of a lot of champions that need to be updated and kind of caught up to the status quo. But if I could, wave my magic wand and fix it today, I think it would be awesome if every champion felt like something you could bring into a plat or diamond level game.
Well, I also feel like there's a perception where just because a champion might not be competitive doesn't mean that they aren't effective, at least in a solo queue environment. I mean, Dom and I, we are friends with a guy who's like a Diamond 1 Poppy main. And, you don't see Poppy in competitive play, but people who know how to play that person can just tear it up if they're just left to do their thing. So I understand that from a competitive sense, but all the champs they can still be great. It's just there's a public perception that, because we don't see it played all the time, they're terrible.
Yeah, the players hate to be wrong. And I've said this throughout the career that many players would rather be perceived as bad players than, uninformed players. LeBlanc, to be fair, has balance issues or had balance issues. Maybe she still does. For a while, her ban rate was completely out of proportion to her win rate. So solo queue people were banning her right and left, even though she wasn't actually that good. And one conclusion is they didn't want their team to give them a hard time if they didn't ban her. It's like, you have to ban LeBlanc. That's just what you do right now. I mean, another explanation is she's so annoying to play against that even if she doesn't win games, you just don't want to play with her anyway. But maybe it's a little both.
Well, so speaking of LeBlanc and champions that need to be banned, actually, last podcast, 196, we talked about what champions to ban in solo queue. And we talked about how they're different tiers, obviously bronze, silver, yada, yada. And down in the lower rankings, or, the different rankings, that Amumu was one that we said you should ban, and I think he has a higher percentage ban down in those lower rankings because what he can do at 40 minutes. So with the nature of the game and how the majority of the player base is I think is silver right now. Do I have that right? I'm kind of looking at everybody else here too.
It's bronze. Most of the player base is in bronze. It gets smaller every tier you go up.
Okay.
I think it's the vast majority are silver or bronze.
Okay. Well, with that in mind, with the mass majority of people that are, paying your salary, really here playing and banning Amumu. Do you, how much do you have to take into consideration that players are banning Amumu, that he's not, he's really not that great. He doesn't get played up in the higher rankings. At what point do you need to touch him because he's ruining the vast majority of the player base? I'm not saying he is, but for the sake of the conversation.
That is definitely a challenge because we try to balance for everyone. And that seems ridiculous to say because it's so impossible to do. But it's not going to be very fun to play thousands of games and finally get to Diamond or above only to find out that the game sucks there because it's really unbalanced. Also makes esports not at all fun to watch. But at the same time, if you love Amumu and you're an Amumu player, even if you're not very good and he gets banned every game, that's not fun either. So we do try to strike a balance between making sure there aren't huge outliers, anywhere in the game. I do think overall players are probably too aggressive at banning problem champions at the lower tiers when, it's probably something you can overcome with skill. It's not really that this champion is unbeatable in bronze or silver.
Sure. I think the majority of the reason that we say ban Amumu down there is because a lot of those games tend to go to 35, 40 minutes or longer because players don't have an understanding of how to take objectives and how to close out games. So, as we moved into Season 4, we saw longer games as a whole. Like, it was harder to carry out of a single... Like, top lane Riven can't carry a game as easily as she could in Season 3. I think that's pretty much fact at this point. Are we looking into something, or I should say is Riot Games looking into something in the future to affect game length or allow players to carry a little bit easier? Does that come with the fighter rework, or is that just kind of like a byproduct of all the changes?
My suspicion is that games are a little long. I don't want to say that's a design direction to fix because it's just kind of my spin on things, and if I talked about it with the team, they may disagree. One of the really interesting things for me coming out of IRF was, it was just fun, and players liked it. It was also fun because it wasn't a solved game. So they were trying things like, oh, did you try Janna and IRF? She could do this crazy shit. And then the other one was they were fast games, and you could get in and play 3 or 4 in an evening instead of like, well, I'm going to do my one game after school or after work before bed, and that's it. So I think there may be a lesson there that at least some type of players wouldn't mind a faster game, or a shorter game, I should say.
I mean, you almost have that game mode, or had the game mode in Dominion and everything. The community or the popularity of the mode died as quickly as every other mode. The community is there, but struggling just because there's no ranked and myriad other reasons. But it seems like the opportunity is there, but how do you get the community really invested in that is the challenge.
Yeah. We use the alternate game modes partially as a test bed for new ideas, and so it would be fun to try something like it's normal Summoner's Rift, but with a few changes just to make the game a little faster. Maybe gold comes in a little quicker, something like that, just to make sure the games tend more toward the 20 to 30 minute mark and not the 35, 40, 45 minute mark. Just to see what the action is.
Do you end up sacrificing the potential for like the epic comeback? I think that's really what makes Summoner's Rift so great. Dominion in Twisted Tree Line and probably all the off-game modes, it seems like it's much, much harder if you're behind to get that epic comeback on. You can still do it, and it feels amazing, but Summoner's Rift, even when you're... Like, you have to be really, really down in order to just know that the game is lost and know there's zero potential for a comeback, and even then Claude's going to tell you, no, you can still come back.
Right.
Because you can.
Yeah,
like, is that really the issue with all the other modes?
I don't know I don't know that someone playing ARAM is necessarily looking for the epic comeback every time. They may just be looking for a fast game where they can get in it and do a lot of team fighting. I think ideally what we would like to see, if we can orchestrate this, is just diversity. That there are short games, there are long games, there are games with an inevitable conclusion, and there are games with a sudden upset at the end. I think when players and viewers start to get bored is like, wow, this played out exactly the same as the last dozen games I saw. First Blood was at 6 minutes, and the Nexus went down at 46.2 or whatever. So really, we'd like to see more variety.
That's why I'm happy that the game has evolved to the point in professional play that we don't necessarily see First Blood at 11 minutes like we used to, or the game wasn't 1 or 2 kills and then the game ended. Now we can see upward of 50 kills total, or 30 kills.
And then then you get those upsets like HQ and EDG where the casters are hoarse
the one
from
that
screaming
immediately-
so loud.
Yeah. Some of those challenger games for me are the most fun to watch because those guys are kind of like taking big risks. Like, if you're going for finals, it's fun to take risks, but there's a lot on the line there for you too. And those guys practice so much already that it's hard for them to. I'm also going to focus on this crazy idea on the side. They have to get good at a variety of champions, kind of in the way they're typically played. But sometimes the promotional challenger series is where you can see like, what the hell? That's crazy, which is fun to watch.
Like Poppy with
Unicorns of Love.
Unicorns of Love.
The Hecarim mid the other day and things like that. Yeah.
Oh yeah, against
Look
CLG, that was great.
Look what Zazis did with the Emperor Palpatine that he developed that became this awesome thing, and then Riot's like, holy shit, his W's bugged. We need to fix that.
There's that.
So during those pro games,
My cow.
do you are you sitting at your desk and do you kind of get you get something across your desk that says, hey, by the way, the cow's W is bugged, and you kind of go, huh, I never saw that coming. Have there been moments like that for you where you just kind of gone, I can't believe that players are doing that with that champion?
Oh, like every day. I mean, that's constant.
It's also like a pro will do something, you go, God damn it, now we have to go in and tune everything again.
Yeah. And sometimes those are the hardest ones to fix. I'll use the little Pantheon debacle we had a few patches ago. Clearly a bug. And the game developer part of you was like, well, we should fix a bug. But then players are so used to it, and that's just kind of the way they've gotten used to it going that it's hard to decide, is this really the right call? In that case, we decided it was the right call because it kind of felt like bullshit that you couldn't, oh, I'm stunned. Why? Oh, this guy just jumped on me. But I don't think we messaged that very well, and I think the Pantheon players are understandably upset at the way that went down. But that does happen sometimes where we're like, crap, this is a bug. This champion is only effective because of a bug. Either we fix the bug and nerf the champion, or we let the bug stay, which feels kind of janky sometimes. Yeah,
or change the tooltip to incorporate the bug.
And that happens sometimes. There's like, what? This wasn't intended, but it's kind of cool. Lee Sin word hopping, not exactly a bug, but that was not what Riot had in mind, and it's kind of cool, so let's run with it.
Yeah, watching players insec other players is a lot of fun, especially in pro play. And then they miss, and you go, oh my god, I can't, they reacted to that, holy shit.
I mean, so the flip side is that every player then decides he or she is insec and doesn't have the proficiency.
Well, I kind of want to shift this discussion to, I won't say a final topic, but one of the final topics is being summoner spells. For the existence of the game, Flash has been in the game. Flash is a summoner spell everybody takes as their second summoner spell. Are we working towards somewhere that we're going to see different summoner spells or a rework of Flash or anything where we don't have to take Flash anymore?
So this is a really interesting topic. We use it a lot as a designer interview question of like, hey, Flash is pretty dominant. What should we do about it? And the kind of typical and wrong answer from our perspective is, you should nerf Flash. That way people will take other options. Flash is cool. Like, Flash does really neat things to the game. A lot of a lot of really awesome plays are an offensive Flash or defensive Flash. So from that perspective, we think the game is better with Flash. Now, maybe that means it should just be a spell you have, and then you also get a summoner spell. Maybe there's other ways to handle it, but I don't think the game would be as much fun if people were always taking Barrier or Clairvoyance or whatever else instead of Flash.
Speaking of Clairvoyance, are you guys taking a look at some of those summoner spells that are just never used at all?
Yeah, I think those are more fair targets for why do we have them in the game if they're obviously weak, if they're just a trap, if they're not cool. Maybe those are the kind of things we should prune. I'm not necessarily sure buffing it to be a really hard choice between Teleport and Clairvoyance is the right call in cases like that. I don't know that many people would cry if we pruned a couple.
Yeah,
you did some work on the summoner spells a few patches ago, so there's tweaking going on, which made things more interesting, like the heal barrier choice.
Do tweak them.
So you said that Riot really encourages you guys to go and talk with everybody, and we've talked about in the past about how you could change cleanse, barrier, and heal. Is Riot still looking at making any changes to any of those abilities, kind of, giving a unique flavor, something else unique to cleanse, for example? Right now, we've talked about giving cleanse the speed boost rather than putting it on heal, for example.
Yeah. I wouldn't say that those are like solved problems, and what we have now is perfect. That is the kind of thing we're always looking at opportunities for. Again, would hate to say like, no, don't take smite as a jungler anymore. But maybe that second choice for your summoner spell could be more interesting.
See, I actually like that there are conditions where one summoner is better than the other. Like, heal might be the correct marksman pick 90% of the time, but there are situations where you are better off taking cleanse, because even if you had the extra health, doesn't mean dick, because you're still going to die because you were locked down forever. But cleanse would have gotten the job done, gotten you out of there. I mean, I don't think it's necessarily, it needs to be a case where summoner spells are, like they all have 50% adoption rate, for lack of a better term.
Yeah,
I think it's okay for certain spells to have situational uses where, and they might be ignored most of the time, but that doesn't make the summoner spell bad. And frankly, that applies to items.
Yeah, totally agree. There is a difference between rarely used and just dead, and I think the dead ones are hard to justify, but totally agree that situational, like, I don't think we would want to see, say, an LCS final where every summoner spell was used. I don't know that we'd want to see a final where every champion was picked. But if something is just not viable at all, it's not realistically an option, then it's hard to say why do we keep that in the game.
Now, for the last couple seasons, like when Season 3 came out, a big thing was that AD itemization. That changed a lot. And then last season with Season 4, support seemed to be a big focus. Do you guys know what the big focus is going to be Season 5, or is that something you can't really talk about?
Yes, we know what it is.
Right, well, we all know where that's going.
But no, we can't really talk about it.
I can't give specifics. In general, the kind of thing we're trying to solve is something I was hinting at before, this feeling that every game's going to kind of play out the same way. It's okay if a lot of games play out the same way, but it would be nice if some of them felt pretty different. Like, wow, that was a strategy that I wasn't expecting, or something I didn't see coming. That kind of fatigue of, I've played a dozen games this weekend, I don't really want to play another game because I kind of know what's going to happen. Want to make, get a little more excitement there.
Okay. I'm actually dry of questions at this point, so I'm going to leave it up to you other four to
Well, we hit the hour point,
yeah,
so
I was just going to say,
if you wanted to take up any more.
Oh no, if you guys have more to pump
Of the
into
time.
him, and if he doesn't have to go anywhere, we can definitely give him a couple more questions. But
Yeah, I don't mind sticking around for a few more minutes if you guys have some.
I have a question I'm personally curious about, and that has to do with the trade-off between mid lanes and support. It seems like anytime you stick a CC on a mid laner, they end up in the bot lane, and then damage is a concern. And then anytime you put too much utility on a support, they end up in the top lane. So how do you guys balance around the support role and try to keep mid laners in mid lane? I know right now Vel'koz is a concern that you guys are looking at because he doesn't really fit into either role really well. How do you guys really try to balance around that?
So there's two answers there. One is, if anything is stifling diversity, that's when we feel like we have to step in. If you can't play a support in bottom lane because they're so effective in mid that you feel stupid to play them in bottom lane, that's when we feel like we need to do something. So that's one answer. The kind of more exciting second answer is, we would like to push the concept of role and lane even farther apart. Like, when you go into Team Builder today, you pick a position. You don't necessarily pick, I'm picking melee, therefore I'm picking top, or I'm picking support, therefore I'm picking bottom. It may always be the case that putting two champions in bottom lane makes a lot of sense because of dragon proximity and things like that, but maybe it doesn't have to be a support with a capital S. Maybe you can have someone playing the support role in the game without being a support champion, if that makes sense.
Well, what about champions like Annie and Zyra, who had to be nerfed because they were seeing more play in that bot role, because their damage output was so significant?
I think that's the kind of thing that going forward we would like to be a little less aggressive about fixing. If players can come up with cool ways to play existing champions that don't feel toxic and don't feel like they're breaking the game, more power to them. Let's see what happens. Maybe people will figure out. Annie certainly has her weaknesses. I think she's a well-designed champion from that respect, that she's good at things and she's bad at things. So maybe they'll come up with ways to handle her as a support. And that's cool. And we want to see that kind of evolution before we immediately jump in and say, no, you're playing the game wrong. We're gonna smack your wrist.
I like the design that you guys have been taking recently. Thresh comes to mind, and Braum specifically, where he doesn't have any way to deal damage on his own in his kit. Leona's another good example of that, where with Braum to deal damage you have to build health, and there is no extra damage added while you're building health because none of those items have any kind of built-in damage mechanic. So Are we going to see more of those type of champions that you, like you said earlier in this podcast, you said we go in, we say with this champion we want it to maybe play top and mid. Are we going to see more of those out of support where we want this guy to play support?
I think in the case of someone like Braum, it makes a lot of sense. He's not going to be great mid. He's not going to be an awesome jungler. And that's because his amazing strengths are offset by weaknesses in the ability to deal damage. So he may just be a narrower champion than someone like Lulu, whose damage gives her a couple different places she can play, or Morgana, who could do anything she wants in the game. And that's okay. That's different champions can do different things, and that should be a fun part of exploring League of Legends, and not just, no, it has to be like this or we're breaking the rules.
I like that a lot, actually. I agree with that quite a bit, and how I feel like a lot of times on the podcast, we flip between you should play this way, but you should also experiment with this. And that's kind of what our conversation has been the entire night, where you probably should play Lee Sin out of the jungle, but he can definitely play top lane if you want to play him there. And so that, speaking of what you just spoke of, it's that.
And we've seen Lee Sin mid and Lee Sin support as well. Right. It's not. And at the competitive level, it's not just like the
hell,
he's
Lee Sin
only
top.
Yeah.
Season 1, my favorite duo was Pantheon Xin Zhao, bottom lane.
Season 1, my favorite duo was Kale Leona.
Jarvan Leona takes the cake. The kill lane bottom thanks to a picture of a goose. That's probably my favorite. Anyway, off topic here. Really taking it off. I guess the final question that I've had more than one message about this. I know you said it before the show. People want to know what your favorite champion is, Greg.
See, that is so dangerous. People are already accusing me of
I was about to
making
say
sure Lysandra was unstoppable based on.
I wanted to hear the PR response. I knew he wasn't going to tell me exactly. I wanted
Just
to hear the PR
Urgot.
response.
you're gonna fall into one of those positions where as soon as you say something like that, everybody's gonna go, "Oh, they're gonna be overpowered." Or something.
Yeah, I try to avoid that. I have champions I like in sense that, the way they were designed that I think is admirable. And I have champions that are fun to watch because they make flashy plays and things like that. But I try really hard not to play favorites. In fact, one of the things I had to struggle with a lot coming to Riot was, like a lot of players, I had champions I played a lot, and I had champions I knew virtually nothing about. And, some of the first meetings I was in, we were talking about, I can't remember what the champion was. Someone, I'm like, crap, I can't. Is that her W or her R? I don't remember. So you have to get very broad very quickly, just in order to to be able to keep up with the conversations.
So when that's a question I got here now is when you're in a design meeting with all the other designers and whatnot, do you guys actually mention the abilities by names, or is it a lot of QWER?
Honestly, it's a lot of QWERP because we count the passive also.
Okay.
And then, particularly the designers live and breathe this stuff so much that they barely even call the champions by their real names. They have pet names or slang names for everyone. So you'll read an email after a play test and people be like, who are they talking about? You're like, oh, that's their pet name for Vayne. Don't worry about it.
Yeah, that's funny. Yep.
Makes perfect sense.
Leo's not Leo, it's Leonidas Pantheon.
Live and breathe the stuff.
Well, excellent. One more time, I guess I'll leave it open to you guys. Anything else for Ghostcrawler before we turn this around? I'll take that as a no. So
I'm excited for the next season.
Boom.
I was gonna thank you for just letting us nerd out for the past hour and 8 minutes.
Yes.
It's been an absolute pleasure.
Oh, I love this kind of stuff. Just being able to think about design rather than think about where are we going to get the engineering resource for this particular feature? Or what are we going to do about this low-performing dude on the team? You know, it's awesome just to think about game design.
Great.
That's really what it's all about.
I hope in the future that we can actually have you on and have like a patch discussion where we can talk with you about the patch, you know, kind of get the insight behind why, you know, you did something and we can give our insight by it. I think that's something that I would really like to talk to you about doing, you know, well into the future. I'm not asking you to come on next week for it, but
yeah, what I'd really love to do too is get maybe, you know, one of the designers on the live team or someone who'd recently worked on a champion update or something like that, because they could give you, you know, very like, this is what I was thinking when I made this change kind of stuff.
I think we just
we would
guys.
We would love to have that
Love
too.
that.
Be it like 7 people then. I don't know. There's probably a limit to the bandwidth here, but it'd be fun.
No, you could have 30 people on a Skype call.
You could all be in the
amazing.
You know what? Just all be in the conference room. Summon them all in there.
Yeah.
We'll
Zoom out the camera.
We'll do a Harlem Shake. He'll put the camera away and everyone will be there. You know.
You and your 2013 reference.
I know. All right. Well, Greg, thank you so much for coming on the podcast. People can find you at Occupy G Street on Twitter, right? I got that. All right. And for everybody else, this has been the Trinity Force podcast. We do release every Monday and Wednesday, so check us out we release twice a week. You can always check us out twitch.tv/TForce podcast, and all of our information is below the channel right now if you want to send us any emails or anything else. Thanks again, Greg, for coming on, and that is episode 197. So we'll see you all next week. Peace.
All right. Thanks a lot.
Hey, and thanks, Greg.
Yeah.